Well, welcome to week 4. Today we're looking at general issues that go into research, into the design of the research. And we're looking at 3 categories of key elements that make up research. One being causation. It's questions about finding out why something occurs. It's the research question. What are we looking for? 2 is the units. For whom or what are we studying? And the third thing we're looking at is the time frame. Are we looking at a certain point in time that we're studying? Are we looking at a person's lifetime? Or are we looking for a period of time, a matter of a couple years or 1 year? Now, looking at causation just a little bit closer. Causation is the focus of explanatory and exploratory types of research. It's very difficult to make connections or indefinite conclusions within exploratory types of research. A very important phrase to remember, whether you become a researcher or not, is correlation does not equal causation. For example, the saying, guns don't kill people, people kill people. So by saying guns are equal crime is not true. But we do know that when there's more guns, that there is likely going to be more crime. But the correlation between guns and crime, it's that's a big debate right now because there's 2 sides to that coin. And no, just because there's a gun around doesn't mean there's more likely going to be crime around. Sometimes guns are deterrents to crime. So there's a lot of variables, and just making just saying that guns, when there's more guns, there's more crime, is slightly a bit misleading. But also saying the exact opposite, if you take away guns, there's not going to be crime because there's it's not that deterrent. So it's how you look at it. But what explanatory research does do a really good job of doing, it looks at the factors that make crime or whatever you're studying more or less likely to occur. And there's usually a lot of variables and a lot of factors that go into that. There are 2 basic types of cause: necessary cause and sufficient cause. Necessary means necessary. It has to be there, a condition that must be present. For example, you need to be arrested before you're charged, and charged before you're convicted, and convicted before you're sentenced. Sufficient cause basically means that there's no guarantee, but it is highly likely so that one thing will cause another. For example, a guilty plea will likely cause for a conviction, but that isn't always necessarily the case. Sometimes there are technicalities where a person will not be convicted after their plea guilty. In looking at validity, validity is basically, are we looking at for what we claim to be looking at, or we think we're looking at, or are we actually looking at something else? And let me explain that a little bit. When we're looking at validity, we're looking at a cause and effect statement that needs to be right. Making incorrect statements about research or validity allows some people to create serious social implications. This is oftentimes when we're beginning the stages of research and looking at validity. This is oftentimes a stage where research is manipulated, and oftentimes that can significantly skew the research findings, which then, if given to the right populations of people without scientific backgrounds, or some with scientific backgrounds, oftentimes can really create serious social implications. For example, by claiming that one race is more violent or more likely to be criminal than another race, has serious implications. But if you look at a study that looks at race and you compensate for variables related to discrimination and poverty and things like that, we're not going to find any or very few differences in the crime rates. Now, looking at the different types of validity, we're going to start with statistical conclusion validity, and it basically is there statistical significance in the research? Is there a big enough statistical significance between the cause and in the effect? Is the standard deviation or margin of error too large for there to be any statistical significance? One factor that plays a big part in this is sample size. If the sample size is really small, let's say 10, you can't generalize that to large groups of people. But if you have thousands of people in your study, or even several dozen, you're much more statistically sound than a very small sample size. Internal validity refers to the observed relationship between two or more variables, but you need to watch out for that third variable. For example, drug court, when somebody is caught using a substance, such as marijuana, and they're given a short jail stay, such as 1, 2, 3 days, that has a positive effect on them, and they're less likely to recidivize or relapse. But longer jail stays, so if you're putting somebody in jail for a couple of weeks, a month, because of that use, and let's say that's their first or second use in drug court, they're more likely to use again. They're more likely to recidivate with something else. Looking at external validity, that is concerned with the replication of studies. Can you find same or similar results from one study to another study regarding a similar phenomenon? And the more times the same results or similar results can be replicated in various studies, the more validity the study has. So, for example, the Stanford prison experiment, if you took that same group of people and did it, a few weeks later, would you have the same results? I kind of doubt it. There's going to be differences. But now take that study and put it in a completely different population of people that have never been to college and that may, not have diplomas and may have been victims of crime and have caused crime, and then you might have significantly different findings. Construct validity is concerned with the generalizability from one study to or more studies to the real world setting. For example, the Stanford prison experiment, Felix Zimbardo, he's actually, his information the results of his study as well as his testimony has been used for people inquiring into the Abu Dhabi incident over there in Iraq and in other situations too. I mean, he's really well known. It's my favorite study in pretty much all of psychology and criminal justice. But you can't take that information and generalize it to all incarcerated populations. Other studies that might have a lot more, has been replicated several times and has big sample numbers. There's studies that have more construct validity and are more likely to be usable in everyday situations and generalizable to those everyday situations. So now we're shifting gears to units of analysis. And units of analysis are who we're studying or what we're studying. And we're going to start small and work up. First being social artifacts. Social artifacts are the things that help us learn more about people and their behavior. They're tangible things for the most part, such as newspaper. Kind of the one exception to that tangible thing is internet postings and social media types of things, although we can get the forensic data on those usually if we have to. Crime scene photographs, incident reports, things like that. And then we have individuals. Individuals, police, victims, defendants, inmates, gang members, and so on. Groups. Groups of people, they're people with the same or similar characteristics, such as gangs, cities, counties. Organizations are similar to groups, but they're formalized groups. They have leaders and rules and regulations and include things like prisons, police departments, courtrooms. treatment facilities. So the last major component that we're going to look at here is the time dimension. Time is really important for helping to determine causation and to generalize research findings. For example, when we look at the reduction in crime in the 1990s, is it because of something that we were doing really good in the 80s, like the Get Tough on Crime and and those types of things, or is it because of something else? I mean, we could, if we looked at just that snapshot in time between the 80s and the early 90s, are there policing methods and laws and things? Is that why we have a reduction in crime? Or is there another factor that we need to take and look at? And there's been some theories that the Roe versus Wade came about around the time period where those people that would be, if they weren't aborted, they would be a lot of times possibly, and there's a lot of what ifs here, but causing crimes in around the 90s where they're starting to become 18 to 25 years old, that high crime age area. So you need to look at time and look at it from various different perspectives when you're looking at research. Now, in breaking this time dimension down a little bit, researchers look at time in regards to their studies a few different ways. Cross-sectional studies are a single point in time. They're a snapshot in time, and they're really good at exploratory types of studies. Longitudinal follows trends over time, or they'll follow a group of people over time, or they'll have a panel where they might interview people, when they're 20 years old, and they might interview this group of people again when they're 40 years old and compare the data. That's a panel study. And then there's retrospective time studies where a person is asked to look back at a time period. For example, have you ever been a victim of a violent crime? And so, in the last 10 years. And, the bad thing about that is they might misremember or forget about an incident, or maybe they've had 5 incidents and instead they report 7 or something like that. So there's a high probability that there might be some misremembering there. And there's prospective studies. Prospective studies is a looking forward. An example of that might be if you put up a drive, a slow sign on the highway in a certain high accident area, and you might ask people in the following town, did you see that sign? What's the chances that you're going to drive slower if you see that sign in the future? Things like that. Again, there's high probability that there could be some misinformation, but it starts gathering some good info to use.